right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to In My Queer Body. I'm glad you're here and I hope you're doing all right. For this week's episode, we have our first official guest joining us from my home state of Texas. Here to talk about his experiences is Emersen. Emersen, thank you so much for being here today. Why don't you go ahead and get us started off by introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about you?
So my name's Emerson. As you said, I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. We actually got to go to high school together. Um,
Yeah.
so, but now I live in Brooklyn, in New York. And so I'm trans. My pronouns are he, him. I'm just really excited to be part of this project you got going on. I think it's really cool.
Thank you. I'm really excited that you're here. I guess we can just go ahead and jump right into the questions. Let's see. Would you say that your gender identity, you said you're trans masculine, right? Trans guy.
Yes.
Would you say that your gender identity has affected the type of care that you've received in the medical field? For example, before you came out, did you ever experience any form of discrimination, or was it solely like after you came out as trans?
Yeah. So, since I have come out as trans, it's definitely like affected the kind of healthcare providers that I seek out, especially for like my trans specific healthcare needs.
Of course, yeah.
I'm really lucky right now to be living in a city with like a lot of LGBTQ specific healthcare centers, a lot of trans specific community health centers.
Hmm.
So that's what I go to for like my like HRT, so to get my testosterone prescriptions and like my gender affirming surgery referrals. And I also like there's a ton of surgeons who primarily work with like trans populations for gender affirming surgeries. So that's been great. And I honestly don't think that I would have had those same resources if I wasn't in New York City. I think it would
Right,
have been a
yeah.
lot different if I was doing a lot of this where we grew up back in Texas. Um, but what I found most shocking about these resources here in New York City is that they're usually like not taking new patients. The wait times are like at best 4 to 5 months, at the worst several years. And then even if you've become a patient, you have like the most difficult time getting the care and attention that you need.
Hmm.
I've had like doctors just like fully not show up to appointments, which can then
Oh
like
my
put you back
God.
on like prescription refills and like just everything, with no explanation. And um, I know that the root cause of a lot of this is that these health centers are like completely understaffed and totally overbooked, but still, you kind of would expect that coming into like a queer specific health center that there would like that there'd be some more attention to detail with the
Right, yeah,
kind of
of
care
course.
you're
You
receiving.
expect them to be a little bit more like prepared for the influx, especially in a place as large as Brooklyn, as large as New York, you know. And it is interesting to me that you say that there's doctors that don't even like show up to appointments. I remember when I lived in Texas, I at first when I started testosterone and stuff, I was just going to like Planned Parenthood, you know,
Hmm.
and their waiting lists are insanely long. When
Yeah.
I first started like looking for appointments, I think it was like 2017, and it was nowhere near as bad as it is now. But even
Hmm.
in like 2019, I found like a private clinic, I guess you could call it, in Dallas,
Yeah.
and even their wait lists were crazy long. So I cannot imagine like in a place as big as Brooklyn with a queer population as large as you say it is, like
Hmm.
that's got to be crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's and I like so in New York City there's kind of there's some like the specific community health centers that like I go to Callan Lord's one. There's a few at the other hospitals around, but they have really long wait times. There's Planned Parenthood too, but like a couple of my trans buddies here, like when I was trying to figure out like what the best places to go to like
Right.
start T were, like they like spoke bad about like the Planned Parenthood. Apparently that sometimes like there they won't, I don't know, they're just not great at prescribing you your hormones. They don't
Oh
keep up
yeah, I
with your
had
blood work
problems with
very
that
well.
in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So
It's
it's
frustrating because they label themselves as, you know, these
mhm.
LGBT safe spaces, and then like you said, they don't know how to handle it, or maybe they're just not willing to handle it to the extent that we need them to. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I've seen like with the place that I go, Callan Lord specifically, like I also noticed too that they have like a rotating staff of like even CEOs, like people who are in charge, the directors. And so like to me that signals that there's just like, I don't know if it has to do with like the healthcare field not really attracting people who are interested in serving trans and queer populations, but like
Yeah.
there's just like there's always rotating out, and so there's no stability in these healthcare centers. And for like as a patient I see that ripple down to like the fact that like I have doctors not show up, or like
Mhm.
the getting access to our records is really difficult. You can't really get people on the phone very well. I think every time we call it's like a 30-minute wait.
my
to
God.
get
And you're
someone
just sitting
from the
there
call
listening to
center.
that horrible wait music, you know? You're just like
Oh yeah.
makes me grind my teeth. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, so that's kind of how things have been since I've come out.
Mm-hmm.
But that was back as so I kind of came out and started like transitioning in like 2021, 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in the army for 4 years before that. And I
Right.
was in the army under former President Donald Trump and the trans service member ban. And so
Gotta
like
love
I
it.
knew, yeah, I knew better. Like at that time, I knew that I couldn't try to seek any medical or psychiatric care
Right.
related to my gender identity. And then there were also a bunch of issues there with like just any kind of queer specific healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really got the chance to see like what it would have been like elsewhere. But yeah, definitely now that's kind of been my experience with healthcare.
That actually kind of answered one of my questions that I wanted to ask you about because when I was, obviously we follow each other on social media and
Mm-hmm.
I can see, your posts about being in the military and stuff. And I was actually really curious because obviously I'm an outsider. I have family that's in the military. I have a cousin who's in the Air Force,
Mm-hmm.
but he's, cis, heterosexual. He doesn't have to worry about any of that
Yeah.
stuff. So I was curious if you felt comfortable kind of like elaborating on how being in the military, being in the army specifically, I don't know if it's different, branch to branch, how queer service members are handled in the healthcare
Mm-hmm.
world. I've heard horror stories from, trans people, gay people, and I've even heard horror stories from like cisgender females who are service
Mm-hmm.
members, just the way that they're treated, say if they get pregnant or if there's like sexual assault. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious if you had anything to say about the state of that.
Yeah, oh god, it's rough. I mean, I think right now my biggest issue with it is that like the army and then like the US military as a whole right now wants to really paint itself as like a leader in diversity, equity and
Hmm.
inclusion initiatives. And they use that as a recruitment tool to get
I've
people from
definitely seen that.
underrepresented
Yeah.
backgrounds. Like, hey guys, like no, we are like if you're a minority out there, don't worry. And here, like, we're all one team, one fight, those kind of things. And it's
Yeah.
not like that, especially with queer service members. The biggest thing that I remember dealing with. So I was at West Point for four
Hmm.
years, and there I had a lot of my, particularly like gay male classmates, try to seek out getting on prep, and we had to really actually like try to work with the nurses to help them get that because a lot of the times they'd show up to appointments with nurses and they'd get shamed out of doing it, and it was
Oh
like, well, why aren't
God.
you taking care of yourself, why aren't you being healthy? And then we kind of got that a little bit fixed at West Point. We had some nurses come in who were really accepting, who were really helpful, but then I remember I had like a buddy who was graduating and then going to flight school afterwards. He's going to go become a helicopter pilot for the army, and he
Okay.
was a gay man, was on prep. And while he was at West Point, he was on prep. And as he was sending all his medical packets to flight school to have just things get transferred, he got a
Right.
call from one of like the officers who's a flight surgeon at flight school. And the
Oh
flight
no.
surgeon started like interrogating him, like, I see you're on prep. Does that mean that you don't care about your health? Like, if you're a pilot, you
What?
have to be responsible for yourself if you want to be like like a good officer, and like started asking him super invasive questions about his sexual practices and
Hmm.
like things that he clearly would not ask any heterosexual
Right.
man or probably woman showing up to flight school.
It was only
um
because he had seen that he was taking prep that he
yeah,
decided, oh, let me ask all these invasive ass questions. Which, by the way, prep is like a preventative type medicine,
yes,
right? So if someone is taking prep, shouldn't that automatically tell you that they care about their health and that they're taking steps to ensure?
exactly. And it's also too, it's not also a medication for gay men.
Right.
There are so many other populations, really any population who might be at risk of contracting HIV can be on prep.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's just, of course, stereotyped that way. And so that
Yeah,
was
and
that was bad. There was also, I mean, as far as being trans in the military went, I only knew one or two cadets while I was at West Point who,
hmm.
even under the trans service ban, were kind of out as trans or gender queer. There was very little they could do, like in terms of medical transitioning. They kind of just like had to hope that people would respect their names and like the pronouns they wanted to go by.
Yeah.
It's actually really sticky now that the trans service ban has been repealed because the army
Hmm.
is now trying to like standardize what it means to be inclusive for trans service members.
Oh, come on.
And I guess there are some positives to it, but like from what I've heard, there's also some really, it's rough.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. I remember obviously being in high school, they would have those days where like the army or like the Marines would come in to the cafeteria and they would have
Uh-huh.
like pull-up competitions or push-up competitions. The way that they really prey on young people, first of all, but
Uh-huh.
also young minority people, people of color and like queer young people, like it's so crazy. It's very it's almost like weaponized, almost like the way that it's very scary in my opinion. I used to be the type of person, I wanted to be like my cousin and go into the Air Force, and then
Uh-huh.
as I got older and I kind of like started listening to like the stories that he would tell, our family, and I started listening to like stories online, I was like, I think I might just stay away from that. but
Yeah, that's I realized way too late, but I mean it
but
was
now
definitely
you're out, right? And there's no more like you're not an active service member or anything like that.
no, thank God. So I've been out for since 2021 to like officially in 2022.
So very
Um
recently.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so it also has been interesting I think to like reintegrate into like what they would call like civilian
Yeah,
society
that
and like
was
also healthcare wise
right. Yeah, that was
as
actually my next question for you.
yeah.
Is what is the difference between what you experienced prior to coming out, whether you were in the military or not, versus now as an out transgender individual? Like,
Mhm.
what are some of the barriers that you faced? We kind of already covered this, but if you can go in
Mhm.
depth.
Yeah, yeah, I think so being in I mean one thing that I've noticed whether like completely like outside of being trans is
Mm-hmm.
the like in the military everything was like healthcare wise provided for you completely. It's like complete
Right.
socialized healthcare. It's great. And so it's like I could show up. I think I got like laser eye surgery for free. I just like you make the appointment, you
God
show up
damn.
to it, you walk away. There's no payment, there's no insurance, there's no anything.
Right.
But that's also while you're just living on a military base. And so
Mm-hmm.
like you really only have access to that like really accessible healthcare when you're active duty all the time on base, all the time working. But then while I was like still technically insured by the military, but I was like not in the military anymore, I
Mm-hmm.
like kind of couldn't access any sort of healthcare because like nobody really takes it's called TRICARE. Nobody takes that outside of a military base. So when it came
Really.
to like, do I want to start trying to get on testosterone? Do I want to try to, start going to a therapist? Like
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do any of that stuff because I had no access to anybody who would take that insurance. And quite frankly, there's not really any providers with TRICARE, with like the military's healthcare that actually are very helpful with trans related healthcare. And I've seen
Right.
like a lot of this is potential like specifically harmful to like children of
Mm-hmm.
active duty service members because they're insured by their parents' insurance with TRICARE. And so if they are trans and they try to seek out HRT or any kind of gender affirming care, they're kind of stuck with like this long it's like the longest waiting list and longest process to like get referrals to the right doctors and
Right.
somebody who actually wants to help them get on, get any kind of care they need. So that was kind of how it was while I was in. And then now that I'm out, I think I've really had to quickly learn like how to navigate insurance, how to navigate doctors, how to
Horrible,
like
horrible system.
my whole like I feel like I've become like a small expert on like insurance in the United States and like healthcare in the US because it's just
But you have to. If you
mhm,
don't know what you're talking about or what they're talking about, you're gonna get so lost, just buried in all
yeah.
of the medical jargon that they use, all the paperwork. Like it's insane. Like I know that when I was transitioning like early on and I was just trying to start testosterone and not really when I was trying to start testosterone, mainly when I was trying to start my top surgery process,
Yeah.
I nearly like had to push my top surgery back because the way that I was like going about it, I was just so uninformed and there was no real way for me to like figure out like whether or not my insurance covered surgery and stuff. At the time, I mean, I'm still covered under my parents' insurance because I'm still young. I'm only
Mhm.
23. But at the time, my parents were not supportive of my decision to get top surgery. So they were like, here's the insurance information, figure it out yourself. So I was emailing constantly. I was calling all these different numbers and they say, oh, you need to talk to this person, call this number. So I'd call that
Yeah.
number and they would say, oh, you got to call this number. So I'd call a different number. And it was just like, I was jumping through all this red tapes and all these hoops that they make you go through, and then at the end they were like, oh yeah, we cover like gender reassignment surgeries, we cover gender affirming surgeries, and I was like, great. And then about like a week, 2 weeks before my actual top surgery date, they said, "Oh, sorry, that's considered a cosmetic procedure, so we're actually not going to cover any of that for you." And I was like, "What the hell?" So I think, like, in my opinion, I think insurance companies really need to kind of like be a bit more upfront about
Hmm.
their stance on transgender and like gender affirming surgeries and things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like I think here in New York, any employer sponsored insurance plan can't have any trans healthcare exclusions.
Right.
That's not the case back in Texas, I know for a
Not
fact,
at
and a
all.
lot of others
No.
like southern and conservative states. Um, but that's also been a worry. Like I actually just so I you might have seen on this, I like just got a top surgery date, which I'm like
I
over the
did.
moon
Yes.
about.
Well,
And like,
congratulations about that,
thank
by the
you.
way.
It's fucking crazy. It's insane. And um, I have had like now that I'm switching a few jobs and like there were a couple times where I'm like I don't know if I'm going to be insured in time. They
Hmm.
moved my consultation up. Like my insurance, does it start beforehand? Will I be covered? Will they be able to submit pre-authorizations with enough time?
Right.
And after I finally got on a plan, like thank goodness my partner's new job has like the best healthcare. Otherwise, I was honestly gonna sometimes with like these like really bad insurance plans, like I would have probably been paying more with insurance than if I had just paid out of pocket for top
Which is so
surgery.
backwards, right? Like, what the hell do I have insurance for if you guys aren't actually helping me cover shit?
Exactly, which was like part
Yeah.
of I was almost like I'm just not going to be insured. I might as well just pay out of pocket for this.
Yeah.
And so I finally got on a plan that works. And then after everything started rolling, I was like, wait a second, I haven't like actually called and 100%, like I need someone to say like like just write it out, put it in
Yes.
writing, tell me specifically that there is no exclusion, that you guys will cover this. And so like
Exactly.
I call on the phone and the representative who's helping me, then they try to like start explaining like, oh well, this is your deductible, this is your out of pocket max. I'm like, dude, I already got that. Like
Yeah.
I like because again, like I'm an expert. You don't need to. That's basic stuff. Just tell me like if you guys cover this, and it's
Right.
so
Like,
hard even to get just a straight answer out of a representative on the phone.
mhm.
And so
I
you're
feel like a
always
lot of times, like the representatives are almost like they're trying to like shirk responsibility.
mhm.
Like they don't want to own up if something bad goes. If something bad happens or something goes wrong, God forbid, they don't want to be the liable like party, if that's
Yeah,
like the right term.
yeah, it's crazy. I've had a few, like I think one insurance plan from my job that like they actually, I remember I like went to my HR lady, I called someone like a representative on the phone from the insurance, and like it took a while. I had to go through like three or four people before someone finally provided me with like a document that showed like all of our plans have
Hmm.
like cover trans healthcare, cover gender affirming care.
Right.
So that was like the only time where I was like, it was up, like you said, it was up front. There was like a full little packet that showed everything they cover, what
Which
you
should be just
required, showed
readily
us.
available for everybody,
Yeah, and
but they make it so
that's
hard to obtain.
yeah, which just makes. I mean, there's like a constant anxiety. I feel like going
Yeah.
through this, and it's definitely not cool.
No, it's horrible, and like you said before, you're living in a city that's labeled as like a queer safe haven, and I just I've never lived in a place that was considered a queer safe haven. I spent
Hmm.
all of my life in Texas in the
Yeah,
South, and granted, Dallas, Keller, it's not the most red areas of Texas, but it's not
yeah.
exactly, a liberal haven. So
Hmm.
I've always been curious, people who live in such liberal places, such queer safe havens like Brooklyn, do you ever feel like places like that kind of like fall short of the expectations that people place on them? Like, in my opinion, again, speaking as an outsider's perspective, I almost feel as if all these queer people and my people from minority groups are flocking to these cities that are supposed to be safe spaces, and
Hmm.
then they feel let down, like the
Hmm.
cities fail to rise up to their expectations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually I work in a bookstore, so I see like a lot of books come through. I see them
Right.
every single day. And there's actually a book that recently came out by I forget the author's name, but he's a trans man who moved
Hmm.
to New York City for that reason,
Oh, okay.
because he was like wherever he was from, it was not a very safe place for him to be, so he fled to New York because he's like
Right.
this is the place. Like they're representing this themselves as this like queer utopia.
It's
And
all
then
they
he got
talk about, basically.
yeah, and then he got there and he was like, wait a second, this is very much like it's better,
Hmm.
but it's definitely not living up to what it says, what we think of it as.
Right.
And I mean, it's definitely, I don't know. I haven't necessarily done this in any other city, but I will say it's been tough. I think also just having like a huge queer population, a bigger trans population than might be
Hmm.
somewhere else. All those, what support and what resources we do have get completely flooded.
Yeah.
And the resources don't align or, like, I guess, meet the needs of the people who are actually there.
Right. The
And
supply and
so,
demand chain is very much an unbalanced scale. You've got,
yeah.
hundreds, thousands probably
Hmm.
people coming and asking, and then you have, I mean, I don't know, I can't imagine there's any more than a couple hundred like clinics.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know. That was always my biggest, like, I don't want to say worry, but just something that always kind of like held me back from moving to a place like that, because
Hmm.
I knew that it wasn't going to just be all rainbows and butterflies, even if I moved to a
Hmm.
more liberal place. And I said to myself, even though Texas is not a very liberal place at all, and even though my options for clinics are very, very limited, I knew that the amount of trans people or queer people in the area that I lived in was probably proportionate to the resources that I had available. So I
Yeah.
was like, I'm just bite the bullet and just do what I can with what I have available to
Hmm.
me. But it is interesting, that all these large liberal cities. I have another person who is going to be a guest in a future episode who lives in Boston, actually, which is
Hmm.
another very liberal area, prides itself on being accepting. And same thing, there's just not enough resources to match up with the demand. It's such a crazy like thing to think about, I guess. And honestly, it kind of feeds into the last question that I'm going to ask you, which is, how do you believe that the medical field is failing the trans or queer community? And what actions do you think professionals in related fields, such as insurance or maybe like lawyers, law and things like that, what actions they should be taking in order to prevent future events from happening?
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the most important things for me is that I feel like, and there's two things. So, like, I think my first point, I think there needs to be more people in healthcare, in insurance, in
Hmm.
law who are dedicated to queer or just LGBTQ specific issues.
Right.
And the problem with that is people who aren't queer typically don't want to take up those issues.
Which
And
which
also
is
too,
is fair. But
yeah, and because I think there is a point. Like, I mean, I kind of see it right now with, like, when I've been trying to access top surgery, is like all of the top surgeons, most of them, if not like 99% of them, are all cis individuals.
right.
And so there's kind of this weird, like, cis savior complex of, like, oh, I'm like doing a
Yes.
service to
Oh,
this underprivileged community.
that is such a good way to put it. I've
Yeah.
never like found the right way to say that, but I feel the exact same way. It's almost as if, granted, okay, yes, you are a medical professional, you are doing me a great service by
Hmm.
performing your job, but don't have such a holier than thou type attitude about it.
Yeah, like they're doing charity work or something like
Yeah.
that. And so that's kind of sticky. And so, as much as I would love to say that it shouldn't be predominantly queer people taking care of other queer people's needs, I think in the end of the day, I think that's where you get the most effective care.
Right.
And so, if I were to think of, like, how do we make healthcare more accepting, more safe for queer people seeking care, is I
Hmm.
think that, like, we need to start representing those communities as, like, we need those people being professionals in those professions. So we need
So
more
we
queer
need like,
doctors, we need
yeah,
more queer surgeons,
exactly.
we need more queer lawyers, queer people working in insurance. I don't know, but, like,
Okay,
it
yeah,
would be it
put
would be
yourself in there.
helpful. Yeah, because, like, right now, everything outside of the queer affirming or, like, gender affirming care that I've been seeking in the last, like, year and a half is, like,
Hmm.
when I go to, like, a physical therapist, when I go see, like, I don't know, anything, like, or like at urgent care, like, I don't know most of the people that I'm interacting with aren't queer. And so now I'm afraid, I'm like, I don't know if this is a safe space anymore. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. And like, I would love to be able to like look online and try to find queer people in every single healthcare profession and every single healthcare specialization.
Hmm.
If not for like, oh, they'll understand, my queer specific needs a little more, but they'll just be some kind of safe person to go to
Yeah, someone
feel
that you
like
can
I'm going to be
talk
taken care of.
a little bit more freely with. I feel, even me personally, when I go and see a doctor, I actually had to go to the gynecologist last week,
Yeah.
just for like a regular checkup. And I was so nervous, because I'm in a foreign country. I don't speak enough of the language to really like accurately depict, stuff that is going on and how I've been feeling and stuff like that. Thankfully, I had my girlfriend with me. She was my translator. But I spent so much time worrying about. First of all, I picked a female doctor because, like, ass, I'm going to see a male gynecologist.
Yeah.
Um, but so I spent so much time trying to find a female doctor, B, a female doctor who had good reviews. And
Hmm.
then while I was, waiting for the appointment, like, first of all, when I was checking in, all of my gender markers on my IDs and stuff were changed. It says
Hmm.
sex male. So when I was checking in, the lady at the front desk literally looked at me and was like, "You're here to see a gynecologist?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "The appointment's for you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's not for your girlfriend?" And I said, "No, it's for me. My name is on the appointment. It's my appointment." And she didn't say anything else, but just that one interaction was enough to get my heart racing, and I was like,
Hmm.
fuck, maybe I should have just, let it be and just see if things got better on their own. And like,
Hmm.
everything was fine. It was just a regular checkup, but still, like, man. And the doctor was actually very nice. She was very professional, but the whole time it was just a constant worry in the back of my mind. What if she starts asking me questions that have nothing to do with the appointment? What if she starts making offhanded comments about, just stuff like that? It's just
Hmm.
so, it would be so much more comforting if I knew that the person who is taking care of me has experienced the same things that I've experienced.
Hmm.
So I completely agree with you. It's almost like, there's such a big push for T for T in the dating
Hmm.
sites and things like that. There should be
Yeah.
T for T in the professional setting as well. We
No, I
want
think that's
trans for
great.
trans when I'm going to the doctor, or to when I'm speaking to an insurance rep. I want
Hmm.
T for T representation there too.
No, yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And that's what actually, like, I think T for T is becoming. I think there are some people like adding to that conversation and making it like T for T isn't just a romantic or an intimate thing. Like, it's an
Hmm.
entire way of like relationally organizing as a community.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it in healthcare. And that, so then like back to like, how is healthcare failing us, is that I think there are a ton of queer individuals who are more than capable and probably have hopes and dreams of like becoming doctors, becoming lawyers. But one, and what I realized as someone who was like in the army, is like being an underrepresented person in those fields. I mean, there's
Hmm.
often, you're up against, there's the sexism, the racism, the homophobia, the transphobia, all of that. And it's
Yeah.
like, of course nobody wants to stay in. And that's a huge reason why I got out of the army, is because like there's just, as much as you want to say like, oh well, I'm going to be championing, or I'm going to be a champion of queer rights, of women's rights, of trans rights, the
Hmm.
lived experience of those people trying to champion those causes is so,
It's
there's so
hell.
much stress, it's so
Yeah.
difficult. And so I really think that it also then unfortunately comes back to non-queer people in those fields to also be part of that, like that shift of like changing the culture and actually
Yeah.
like seeking out underrepresented people to then bring into that profession.
Exactly. We need
um
we need more cishet people lifting up and uplifting, queer and trans people, because, like you said, it's, especially if you're someone who's trying to be a trailblazer and trying to, bring more awareness. It's like you said, it's daunting. It's very intimidating. A lot of times, positions may be given to a cishet person just because the employer who's doing the job search knows that you're queer, knows that you're trans, and they decide just based off their own stereotypes or biases not to give you the job. And it's so important, I think, like you said, to just really try and uplift and give a platform and give a voice to people who are actually experiencing the things that you're trying to treat.
yeah.
Uh, I think that's a great point to end off on there. I mean, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're cis or you're heterosexual, and you know somebody that is queer, that is trans, that's in the same field as you, or trying to make it out there, trying to be a trailblazer, uplift them, support them. Share if they have a podcast like this. Just make sure that you're showing your support, not only by just saying I support you or oh I'm an ally. Like do something about it. Um, yeah, Emerson, I want to thank you again for coming on the show with me today and speaking out about your thoughts and your experiences. I really appreciate it. I had a blast doing this. It was a great first episode to kick things off, I think. To everyone listening at home, I'd like to thank you as well for tuning in to this week's episode of In My Queer Body. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope to see you guys here for the next one. Thank you.